Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." There are so many invisible forces in our lives that are pushing us towards things and pulling us away from other things. Our families are pushing us to always spend more time with them and help out at home. Our bills and our expenses are always pushing us to work and make more money. Fear of missing out pulls us to get-togethers that we don't even really want to be at. If we aren't careful, we could spend our whole lives being pushed and pulled by these invisible forces, never quite going where we want to go. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. Most of us are being commanded, in my opinion. We say we're going to do something like sit down to write, but once we sit down to write, our boredom commands us. Scroll through your phone a little bit. Our stomachs command us. I'm hungry, make me a sandwich. Our bodies command us. I'm tired, I want to lay down. We can't obey ourselves, so every whim that comes up commands us. Some forces in our lives become so strong, they overpower all of the other forces. They become the commanding force in our lives, dictating all of the decisions and actions that we take. For a long time, my commanding force was status. Status kept me going through college and studying civil engineering, even though once I was done with the first semester, I realized that I didn't really want to do that. It kept me going through college even when I realized that I was going to take on thousands of dollars of debt to stay there. Status would keep me in the office until 11 at night, competing with my peers at a job that I hated. Worst of all, status kept me from doing the one thing that I cared about, building a startup. It's crazy to think about it, but every time I chose to chase status, instead of doing something that I cared about, I was subconsciously reinforcing this idea in my mind that what other people thought of me, which is what status is, was more important than what I cared about and what I thought. That's the insidious thing about status. Since it depends on other people's opinions and not what you think, it robs you of your self-satisfaction. Once you care about status, you surrendered your peace to the masses. That's horrible, because in reality, most people aren't thinking about us or looking at us. And if they are looking at us and thinking about us, pretty soon they're not going to be, because something else is going to come up, and people are just fickle in that way. But that's not even the worst thing about status. The worst thing about status is that it could vanish overnight. I learned this lesson the best way, the hard way. On September 23rd, 2019, I still remember I was drinking a Starbucks pumpkin cream cold brew. I walked into the office and 20 minutes later I was walking out. I'd gotten fired. Just like that, the status that I'd been chasing for 8 years since I graduated high school disappeared in an instant. All it took was a faceless suit to decide that I didn't fit in with the company, and I was out. You know what's really crazy though, is that for most of my adult life, I hated the path that I'd chosen. When I was in college, I was unhappy. At the corporate jobs that I had, I didn't want to be there. I wanted nothing more than to be free. And in that moment, when I got fired, I was free. But the pursuit of status had become such a powerful force in my life that I didn't even want the freedom when I got it. I would have given up that freedom in an instant. Had someone walked up to me and offered me a job that I didn't want, at a company that I didn't care about, but it restored that semblance of status, I would have probably taken it. Luckily for me, nothing like that happened. I had time to think, which, if I'm going to be honest with you, wasn't something that I'd really done in a long time. So reluctantly, I didn't want to. I took the time out, I paused, and I thought. And slowly I began to realize what I've been sharing with you guys in these videos. That for the 8 years since I graduated high school, between 2011 and 2019, I'd done nothing but chase status. The pursuit of status had become such a large presence in my life that I wasn't even aware of it anymore. Kind of like how a fish doesn't know it's in water because that's its reality. Chasing status had dictated all of my decisions and all of my actions that I didn't even know that it was there. But just like if you take a fish out of water, it realizes that it had been in water. Losing my job showed me what I'd been blind to. Getting fired, in a way, opened my eyes. See, the whole time I was in college and at these corporate jobs, if you would have asked me what I was doing, I would have never told you that I was chasing status. I would have probably said something along the lines of, I'm trying to make money or build a career. I'm trying to do something worthwhile. But that wasn't the reality of it. Because when I lost my job in September of 2019, I wasn't worried about money, I wasn't worried about my career, and I wasn't worried about doing something worthwhile. I was worried about my status. I was worried about how I looked to my friends, my family, my peers, and my colleagues. Deep down, that's what I'd really cared about. I'd fallen, and if I didn't get up quickly, I wasn't going to be able to turn back. Realizing I cared more about status than anything else signaled to me that I wasn't in control. No wonder I couldn't do what I wanted when I sat down. I couldn't obey myself. I was being commanded by status. I had to learn to obey myself. I couldn't live like this. For years, I surrendered my energy, my judgment, and my abilities to the status chase. I told myself that what other people thought was more important than anything I did or thought. There's no way you can build a startup thinking like this. In fact, I don't think you can live a life worth living thinking like this. I'd given up a lot of control. It was time to reclaim it. I had to find humility. Listen, anyone who's known me, who's come into contact with me, who's been my friend, who's worked with me, whatever, odds are the word that they would use to describe me is not humility. Probably the opposite. But the fall of 2019, having lost my job, my circumstances in life had kind of humbled me. And in that moment of receptiveness, I found this book by this author, The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And this book really telegraphed a message to me that I think I was in dire need of. The best way that I could describe it to you is kind of like this. If you walk into the gym and you try to pick up the heaviest weights possible, all you're going to succeed in doing is hurting yourself. That's arrogance. Humility is understanding your weaknesses, is understanding that you can't pick up that weight. Once you humble yourself in that manner, you're able to identify your weaknesses. And once you identify your weaknesses, you're able to truly strengthen them. I used to think that humility was weakness, but I understand now that it's the exact opposite. Bravado, arrogance, status chase, that's weakness. If you think about it, playing to appearances or trying to get status is basically you saying you don't have the inner strength to be content with yourself. And so you need people's approval so that you can feel okay. Humility, that's quiet. Humility is that inner strength where you know where you're at and it doesn't matter how you look to other people. It's freedom from the status chase and playing to appearances. And for me, understanding that was incredibly freeing. The next thing that I learned that really helped me out was that I had to stop comparing myself to other people. In my life as a status chaser, I was always trying to figure out where I stacked up against other people. And deep down, I always knew that this was wrong. But I understood this from a completely different angle when I discovered an online essayist by the name of David Perel. David, by the way, if you're watching, please follow me on Twitter, man. I've been trying to get your attention, but I guess it's kind of difficult when you only have 70 followers. Anyway, my first intro into his work was a long-form essay called Peter Thiel's Religion. Now, Peter Thiel, for those of you who don't know, was one of the founders of PayPal along with Elon Musk, the first outside investor in Facebook, and a huge name in Silicon Valley amongst many other things. In the essay, Perel outlines Thiel's worldviews and how they affect his business dealings. See, Thiel has this interesting idea that competition in business is not a win-win situation. He points to businesses such as restaurants or the airline industry, where businesses are competing with each other to give the most value to the consumer, but as they do that, they slash profits and it becomes increasingly difficult for the businesses to survive. Look at the restaurant industry in New York City. So many restaurants, so much competition, it becomes increasingly difficult for the restaurants to survive. In fact, only 10% of restaurants in New York City survive. Or the airline industry, companies are going out of business all the time. Thiel prefers businesses that are not competing with other companies. He prefers businesses that are kind of staying in their own lane, if you will. Think about Google, for example. When you're thinking about search engines, you're not thinking about Bing or Yahoo, you're thinking about Google. A company like that does their own thing, that's not competing with anyone else, they formed a monopoly. Now, Perel takes this idea from Peter Thiel and he implores his readers to apply it in their personal lives. The idea is this: we all have a personal monopoly on our own experiences. If we try to compete with other people, we're gonna slash profits, so to say. We're gonna kill off the things that make us unique, and we're not gonna be able to provide the world that thing that only we can provide. By embracing our uniqueness, by embracing the experiences that we've had, whether it be our upbringing, our education, where we come from, the languages that we speak, if we embrace all of those things, we'll be able to offer the world something that no one else can. We'll have a monopoly on that. We're not going to compete and we're going to be able to continuously grow. Whereas if you're always looking at what other people have, if you're always trying to compete with other people, you're going to kill off the things that make you inherently unique. You know, aside from the fact that comparison is the death of joy, comparison is the death of your potential. If you're always looking at what other people have, you're never going to be able to focus on the resources that are in front of you, and therefore you're never going to figure out how you can make what you have work for you. I had to start thinking long-term, especially as it concerns pleasure. See, in the first couple of days after I lost my job, I was super stressed out and anxious, and I started craving nicotine. I'd always dabbled in hookah and those Mileys and those Juuls, but in my newfound stress and anxiety, my body was literally craving a quick hit of dopamine. I'm not gonna lie to you, I gave in a lot. But pretty quickly I realized that giving into my cravings was doing me no favors. In fact, I began to realize that the instant gratification cycle that I was getting caught in was starting to melt my brain. See, the world around us kind of has us wired to look for quick hits of dopamine, for instant gratification, one-day shipping, millions of movies just a click away, Dogecoin and Wall Street bets enticing us with potential gains of millions of dollars. But that kind of thinking, that's looking 3 inches in front of your face. Deep down, I knew that if I wanted to achieve what I wanted in life, that if I wanted to build a startup, I had to start looking into the future, far into the future. And that meant delaying gratification. This one was particularly difficult for me. See, for a long time, I'd arrived at the conclusion that the point of life was to indulge in the pleasures that were in front of us. I mean, nothing else was guaranteed except for death. But if indulging in instant gratification today meant that I would never achieve the long-term goals that I had for myself, that wasn't really good for me, was it? Delaying gratification brings you closer to the goals that you set further down the line. Now, the next thing that I learned that helped me out a lot was I had to start building routines. See, I noticed that in my day-to-day life, I wasn't consciously thinking about what I was doing. I was playing out these background processes, or in plain English, I was playing out my habits. My habits were dictating what I did day to day, and what I did day to day became what I was. I realized that if I wanted to go a different place than where I'd been going, I had to start forming new habits. Routines are the way to forming new habits. See, if you do something once, it's a blip, it's a drop in a bucket. But if you do it consistently, that's how you get somewhere. Think of it like this. If you have your routine and you stick with it, it's kind of like Pavlov's dog, that experiment. If every day you sit down to work on your startup, on your writing, on your artwork, every day at 6 p.m. you sit down to work on it, pretty soon 6 p.m. is going to roll around and you're going to say, I need to get to my work. This is the way to get there, because if you're always consciously thinking about what you're going to do, you're going to burn yourself out. Now, the second reason that I'm a really huge fan of routines is the longer you stick with the routine kind of starts taking a life of its own and people start bending around it. One of the things that I've always really appreciated in New York City is how on Friday afternoon, 5 or 6 p.m., everyone knows if you're doing business with a Jewish person, you're just gonna have to wait until Sunday. How did the craziest city in the world come to like this unanimous agreement that, that on Friday evenings, we're all gonna back off if we're doing business with Jewish people? I think that it comes from the fact that Jewish people have maintained that tradition for over 5,000 years. The longer you stick with the routine, the longer you hold a tradition or a habit or whatever you want to call it, the more powerful it becomes and the more people start bending around that habit. So as you begin forming your routines, your habits, whatever you want to call them, the more consistent you are with them, the more people are going to start bending around them. The more you're going to be able to use those routines to get to where you want to go. On the other side of that, if you don't keep your routines, if you don't keep your habits, you're going to get sucked into the routines and the habits of the people around you, whether it's your job or your family or your friends. You got to have faith. And I'm not talking about praying or religion. I'm talking about faith that tomorrow is going to be better if we do what we have to do today. There's no guarantee, but you have faith that it'll happen. Because if you don't have faith, you're never going to do it. And the more faith that you have, the more you're going to be able to mold the environment around you. Because what you believe is what you create. This is an ancient idea, and contemporarily, it's starting to get proven. Our minds are a glass ceiling. What we believe we can achieve is what we achieve. So you have to have faith. You have to have faith. You have to have faith. All right. Now you found faith. What's next? You got to take the risk. Until you take a risk, until you put your money into it, until you invest your time, until you put your reputation on the line, it's not real. In 2015, I read this really wonderful book that I try to read once a year, Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. By the way, if you're watching, man, please unblock me on Twitter. I'm a huge fan of your ideas. I've even tried to audit your courses, but NYU wouldn't let me, those bastards. In Antifragile, Taleb outlines this stupidly simple concept. No risk, no reward. Sometimes it's good to have those really simple ideas articulated. If your ass is not over the flames, you're not gonna get up and do it. Risk is the secret ingredient that makes things happen. You need to take on risk. You need to invest your money, your time, your reputation, because if there's nothing on the line, it's not real. If you're trying to build a business and you're not taking the risk to build your business, why should I have faith in the business? If you're not eating your own cooking, why should I pull up with a plate? Use your tools. Don't let them use you. I used to be one of those people who would spend 7 to 8 hours a day on my phone, and that was devastating. Because if there's 24 hours in the day and we sleep 8 hours, then we have 16 hours left. But if we have an 8-hour day job, that's 8 hours left. If we have to commute 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, that's 6 hours left. And take out some errands, sitting down to eat dinner, getting changed, at best you have 5 hours left. Instinctively, we're wired to look for novelty. The idea being, if we had new information, it would increase our chances of survival. But our phones and the social networks that we scroll on, they're always overriding and hijacking that instinct and providing us new pictures and new videos, but they're not increasing our chances of survival. All they're doing is keeping us on their platforms for longer. The way that I look at it is, if I'm constantly consuming, if I'm constantly scrolling, I'm not producing. And the phones that we have, the computers, the tablets, they can all be tools for production, but they can also be tools for consumption. It's up to us to decide what we're gonna do with them. The last thing I learned that really helped me was understanding that you don't need to quit your job if you want to build a company. This is one of those ideas that you're always hearing from people, and it kind of embeds itself in your mind. Quit your job, build a company. I'm going to quit my job and build a company. If you have expenses and responsibilities and overhead and a family to take care of, and you're going to quit a job that's paying you money to build a company that has no revenue in the beginning, you're going to get hurt. The idea isn't quit your job and build a company. The idea is, if you want to build a company, but you don't have the money to do it, stick with your day job. You need to survive. All that other time that you have where you're not working, work on your startup. Prioritize your time. If you're working a 9 to 5, what are you doing 5 to 9? And don't get sucked into your job. Our jobs can exert so much pressure and force on us. They try to get us to work overtime. They try to entice us with promotions. They try to have happy hours and gatherings after work. You have to resist all of that. Don't get too caught up in the status pursuit. Your end goal is not status. Don't get caught up in the OT. Your goal is not to make more money with the company. Your goal is to make more money with your company, with your startup. You have to start viewing your company the way they view you, as a means to an end. You are an employee of the company, and if something were to happen to you, the company would keep on rolling along. You need to approach the company with that same kind of detachment and sang-froid. You're using that job so that you can fund your activities and your startup for the time being and get to your end goal. The company does the same thing with you, do the same thing to the company. Over the last few years, as I've worked on Nazar, I've noticed something. Creating something new, whether it's a piece of art, a product, a company, inevitably means you're gonna have to swim against the current. In a world where we're always being pushed to consume, becoming a producer is a small act of protest. Our environments mold us all, whether we want to admit it or not. Unfortunately for us, our environments aren't molding us to be creators. In my opinion, our schools, our advertising, our culture, they're not empowering creation. It seems like the only thing that we're being empowered to do is consume more and more. And don't get me wrong, consumption, it's a wonderful thing. It's what makes life worth it. When you have a meal cooked by someone who loves you, or you listen to a song that hits on something universal, that's a sacred experience. It's transcendental. But life isn't all about consumption. I believe that the human spirit longs to create. It longs to express itself, whether it's through art, cooking, or building a company. But you can't produce if you're always consuming. If you really want to put your soul into your work, you kind of need to hit the pause button for a moment. You got to clear the air. You got to clear the distractions. Free yourself of all the forces that are pulling on you in all these different directions. You have to achieve a degree of clarity. If your spirit is being pulled in all these different directions by all these forces in your life, you're going to struggle. You can't create something worthwhile if you're worried what people think about you. To become a creator, you have to overcome yourself. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. Here's to obeying ourselves, so that we can use that power to create the world around us.